Let's discuss the nervous system. So before we start with our lecture proper, let me define the objectives of today's lecture. Okay, the first is to list the structures of the nervous system. Next is to describe the three basic functions of the nervous system. Third objective is to list the different parts of the CNS and the PNS. So when we say CNS, it stands for Central Nervous System, and PNS stands for Peripheral Nervous System. Next objective is to identify the three major regions of the brainstem and note the functions of each area. Let's start with the structures of the nervous system. Okay, the structure of the nervous system is said to be one of the smallest but most complex. Okay, and also the whole nervous system weighs 2 kilograms or 4.5 pounds, or that is only 3% of the total body weight. Imagine, 3% lang siya of the total body weight. That's why it is called the smallest. But it is also complex because madami siyang mga sangay-sangay. Okay. Now, the structure of the nervous system is divided into two. We have the CNS, this one, and we have the PNS. Okay. Your central nervous system has only two components. We have the brain and the spinal cord. Well, the PNS, we have several. Under the PNS or the peripheral nervous system, we have the cranial nerves, the spinal nerves, the ganglia, the enteric plexuses, and we have the sensory receptors and skin. So all of these are under the PNS, and these two are under the CNS. Okay? So for today, our lecture is divided into two. The first part is the central nervous system, which is this one, and the second part is the peripheral nervous system. But we are going to discuss a little bit of these structures while we are at it. Okay. So let me first define the brain, or let me first describe the brain structure a little bit. So the brain is composed of 100 billion neurons. The second structure is the cranial nerves. The cranial nerves, there are 12 cranial nerves present in the human body. Okay? It follows a defined path and serves a specific region of the body. So those 12 cranial nerves, meron siyang specific na mga functions. Later, we are also going to tackle that one. Next, the spinal cord. The spinal cord connects through the brain. Encircled by bones of the vertebrae column, there are about 100 million neurons of the spinal cord. Next, the spinal nerves. The spinal nerves emerge from the spinal cord. Meaning ng emerge, dyan siya nag-branch. Okay? It branched out. The spinal cord branched out into spinal nerves. So, dyan siya galing. The ganglia naman, these are small masses of nervous tissue consisting primarily of neuron cell bodies that are located outside the brain and the spinal cord. Okay? And these are also associated with the spinal and the cranial nerves. Next, this enteric plexuses. The enteric plexus are found at the walls of organs of the gastrointestinal tract, extensive networks of neurons. Okay, and the last one is we have sensory receptors. These receptors, specialized cells that monitor changes in the internal or the external environment. Okay, next. Now let's proceed with the three main functions of the nervous system. Okay, so the three main functions of the nervous system is we have sensory. It functions as a sensory. It functions as an integrative, and it functions as a motor. Okay. So let's first define. When we mean by sensory function, it has sensory receptors, okay, in which it detects internal stimuli and external stimuli. Example ng isang internal stimuli is the blood acidity. Okay, that's your blood acidity or your blood components. Those are internal stimuli. Well, external stimuli, example naman yan is feeling of warmth, feeling of coldness, anything from the exterior or from the external environment that you can feel sa iyong katawan. That is external stimuli. Under the integrative function naman, when we say integrative function, it is the processing of sensory information by analyzing and storing some of it to determine the proper course of action. From the word integrate, okay, it mag-process pa siya before mag-respond ang inyong katawan or ang inyong nervous system. Next, the motor function elicits an appropriate motor response by activating effectors. Can you still remember the effectors from our very first topic? Effectors could either be glands and muscles, So when your motor will respond by activating these effectors, it could either be through the cranial and the spinal nerves. So yung cranial and spinal nerves sila ang maggagawa ng they are going to hint the organs or the structures that are found in your nervous system to act a certain way or to create an appropriate motor response for a certain action or certain stimuli. Okay? Next. The subdivisions of the nervous system. So we have already talked about this one. We have the central nervous system, the CNS, and we have the PNS or the peripheral nervous system. So again, for this video, we are only going to discuss the central nervous system, and we will have a separate discussion on peripheral nervous system. So that is for the part 2. Okay? So again, when we say CNS, again, what are the two structures found in the CNS? We have the brain, and we also have the spinal cord. Okay? And for the PNS naman, all nervous tissue outside the CNS. So lahat ng structures except for brain and spinal cord, these are under the PNS or the peripheral nervous system. Now, your peripheral nervous system has two functional divisions pa. Okay? The peripheral nervous system has two functional divisions. The first one is we have the sensory, and the second one is we have the motor. When we say sensory, it is also called as afferent. Okay? Afferent nervous system. These afferent or sensory peripheral nervous system composed of nerve fibers that convey impulses to the CNS. Okay? So, meron siya mga nerve fibers and then ipapasa niya yun lahat kay CNS. The motor or the efferent naman is from the CNS towards the effector organs. Could either be a gland or could also be a muscle. Okay? Again, when we say sensory or efferent, these are nerve fibers that convey impulses. It connects directly to the CNS. Si motor naman or si efferent nervous system is that it connects the CNS towards the effector organs. Okay, so that's under the two functional divisions of the PNS. We have sensory or efferent, and we have motor or efferent. Next, the motor or the efferent could either be somatic or autonomic. Okay, again, the motor or the efferent could either be somatic or autonomic. When you say somatic, it is voluntary. Okay, so ikaw, you have conscious control over something. When we say autonomic naman, baliktad, it is involuntary. Okay, there are two types under the autonomic. Okay, subdivided pa si autonomic. Si autonomic could either be sympathetic or parasympathetic. When we say sympathetic, it is the flight or fight response. Or ito yung sinasabi lang adrenaline rush. That's sympathetic, fight or flight response. When we say parasympathetic, it's rest, digest response. In our nervous system, meron tayong tinatawag na nerve cells. And these nerve cells are called neurons. Then, your neurons has three parts. We have the cell body, the axons, and we also have the dendrites. When we say cell body, it is also known as pericardion or soma. Okay? And then the axons, it serves as or it propagates nerve impulses toward another neuron. So from this neuron, from neuron A to neuron B, palabas. Okay? That's away. Okay? Si dendrites naman are receiving or input portions of a neuron. Baliktad, paloob naman yung kanyang mga paloob naman yung kanyang function. Okay? From an outside neuron, papunta sa'yo. Yung si axon naman is from yours to a different neuron. Okay? So, kung meron tayong neurons or meron tayong nerve cells, meron din tayong tinatawag na supporting cells ng neurons. So, that is what you call your neuroglia. And neuroglia has 6 types. Okay? There are 6 types of neuroglia. We have the astrocytes, the oligodendrocytes, we have the microglia, the ependymal, we have the Schwann, and we have the satellite. Okay, isa-isahin natin. When we say astrocytes, they are star-shaped cells, have many processes, and are the largest and most numerous of the neuroglia. Okay? When we say oligodendrocytes, they form and maintain the myelin sheath. When we say microglia, these act as phagocytes. When we say phagocytes, they are cell-eating. Okay? Next, ependymal, possibly monitor and assist in the circulation of the CSF or the cerebrospinal fluid. We have the Schwann. These are like oligodendrocytes, which myelinates the axons, but Schwann can only myelinate a single axon. So, oligodendrocytes can myelinate 2 or more than 1. Si Schwann is isa lang. And last, for the supporting na neuroglia, satellite neuroglia rather, it regulates the exchanges of materials between neuronal cell bodies and interstitial fluid. Okay? So, remember all the 6. Okay. Now, let's proceed with the central nervous system, the brain. Okay, so yan siya pinaka-first. The brain arises from the 3 neural tube which forms the primary vein vesicle. So we have the 3 primary vein vesicles. We have the forebrain, we have the midbrain, and we have the hindbrain. So dito sa ating structure, we have here the hindbrain, the forebrain, and we have the midbrain. Okay. So let's discuss. Madami pa yan siyang parts. Okay? Sige. Dito may tayo kay forebrain. Under the forebrain is we have the first part which is the diencephalon. So, the diencephalon is part of the forebrain. It is composed of the hypothalamus, thalamus, and epithalamus. Okay? Next is we also have the telencephalon. The telencephalon is still part of the forebrain, which forms the Mickey Mouse's ears called the cerebral hemisphere or the cerebrum. Okay? Next, we have the hindbrain. Under the hindbrain, we have the metencephalon, the myelencephalon, myelencephalon. We have, it also forms the pons, the cerebellum, the medulla oblongata. And then we have the midbrain. The midbrain remains undivided. Okay? Okay. Dito tayo sa ventricles. Ventricles of the brain transports the CSF or the cerebrospinal fluid to the cranial cavity, and it is also lined by the ependymal cells. Okay. The ependymal cells will form the choroid plexus in which the CSF is produced. Okay, so isa-isahin natin. Okay. Dito muna tayo kay lateral ventricle. So these two here, itong dalawang C, are called lateral ventricle. The lateral ventricle are C-shaped chambers that reflect the pattern of cerebral growth separated by septum pellucidum. Okay, so these two ventricles or two lateral ventricles are divided by the septum pellucidum. So each lateral ventricle, so ito po siya, each C-shaped, communicates with the diencephalon of the third ventricle. Okay? So again, ito po siya communicates with the diencephalon of the third ventricle via the interventricular foramen. Okay? So dito po nagko-connect or nagko-communicate ang each ventricle sa diencephalon, sa interventricular foramen. Next, the third ventricle is continuous with the fourth ventricle via the cerebral aqueduct. So, saan si cerebral aqueduct? Here. This is the cerebral aqueduct. The third and the fourth ventricle, the third ventricle and the fourth ventricle is continuous through the cerebral aqueduct. There are 3 openings that mark the fourth ventricle. So, what are the 3 openings? We have the paired lateral aperture and median aperture. So, paired lateral aperture, so ito dalawa, 1 and 1, and then we have the median aperture. So that's all 3. So these 3 openings mark the fourth ventricle of the brain. Okay? We have the cerebral hemisphere or the cerebrum. It is the most superior part of the brain, and it is 83% of the brain mass. So our cerebral hemisphere or cerebrum is divided into 4 lobes. Okay? We have the frontal, we have the temporal, we have the parietal, and the occipital. In each lobe, it is responsible for something. So meron siya mga functions. For the frontal lobe, it is responsible for our personality, our judgment, expression, language expression, and we also have the motor movement. Si temporal naman is responsible for our hearing, language, comprehension, storage, and recall of memories, and the limbic system is also located sa temporal. When we say limbic system, it controls the basic drives such as hunger, anger, emotion, and sexual drive. Okay? Next, for the parietal, it is responsible for the reception and interpretation of sensation. For example, yan is we have the touch, temperature, and could also be pain. Yan. And then the occipital is, it functions to interpret the visual stimuli. Okay. Now, there are 2 speech areas in our cerebrum. Dalawang speech areas sa ating cerebrum or sa cerebral hemisphere. We have the Wernicke's area and we have the Broca's area. When we say Wernicke's area, it is responsible for the sensory reception of speech. Okay? May ibig sabihin, it processes kung ano yung sinasabi ng kausap natin, and it also comprehends. Okay? iniintindi mo yung sinasabi ng kausap mo. The responsible niya na area sa cerebrum is the Wernicke's area. Okay? Next, the second speech area is the Broca's area. The Broca's area, ito po siya yung motor speech. It formulates the speech response. Papaano ka magsasalita. The diencephalon. The diencephalon consists of hypothalamus, thalamus, and epithalamus. Okay. When we say hypothalamus, it controls the ANS. When we say ANS, it is the autonomic nervous system. When we say autonomic, again, it is involuntary. Could either be sympathetic or parasympathetic. Can you still remember? Okay. The hypothalamus controls the ANS, the body temperature, the appetite, the water balance, the sleep-wake cycle, and also the emotions. Okay. Next, the thalamus. The thalamus is the relay station of all sensory stimuli towards the brain, and the epithalamus connects the limbic system to other parts of the brain. Okay? Next slide, we have the cerebellum. The cerebellum is the second largest brain region. Has also two hemispheres. The cerebellum maintains muscle tone, coordinate muscle movement, posture, and control balance or equilibrium. Next, we have the brainstem. The brainstem is formed by the midbrain, the pons, and medulla oblongata. The function of the brainstem is that it houses the center for respiration and cardiovascular system. The midbrain here is located between the diencephalon and the pons. So, sa gitna siya. It connects with the cerebrum. The function of this one is for movements of the eye, auditory, and visual processing. The pons connects the cerebellum with the cerebrum. And we have the medulla oblongata. It is the most inferior portion of the brainstem. Serves as the center for autonomic reflexes to maintain homeostasis. It also regulates respiratory and cardiac functions. Next, let's proceed with the protections of the brain. Syempre, hindi natin pwede na brain and then ang covering na nun is the skull. Syempre, meron pa yan siya mga soft tissue structure to fully protect the brain. Okay. So, the first protection is we have the meninges. The meninges protects the CNS. It is found on the external surface of the brain. It also protects the blood vessels and contains the CSF or the cerebrospinal fluid. So your meninges has three types. We have the dura mater, we have the arachnoid mater, and we have the pia mater. So the dura mater is said to be the strongest meninx. Meninx is the singular form of meninges. It is two-layered sheet of fibrous connective tissue. The arachnoid mater forms a loose brain covering, and we have the pia mater, which is composed of delicate connective tissue and richly invested with tiny blood vessels. The separation of the dura and the arachnoid mater is the subdural space. Okay? The separation between the dura mater and the arachnoid mater is the subdural space. Beneath the arachnoid mater is the subarachnoid space, which contains the largest blood vessels serving the brain and also contains the CSF. So, doon siya specifically makikita. Okay? Speaking of CSF, CSF is also a protection of the brain. It forms a liquid cushion that gives buoyancy to CNS structures. It also helps nourish the brain. So the CSF makes the brain semi-float. Okay? And we have the third na protection of the brain. We have the blood-brain barrier or the BBB. It is a protective mechanism that helps maintain a stable environment for the brain. So the BBB allows the passage of the first. We have the glucose, the essential amino acids, and some electrolytes. While it also blocks metabolic wastes, proteins, certain toxins, and most drugs. Traumatic brain injuries. So we have here the concussion. When we say concussion, it is the alteration in brain function. Okay, example ng mga concussions is blow to the head. Next, the contusion. A contusion is much more serious concussion. It can bruise the brain and cause permanent neurological damage. Yan. The subdural hemorrhage, bleeding from ruptured vessels. Cerebrovascular accident, stroke ito siya, when blood circulation to a brain area is blocked and the brain tissue dies. Okay? So your CVA is also called a stroke or brain attacks. Okay? So when a brain tissue dies, or when a tissue dies, generally, it is called ischemia. Okay? When a tissue will die, it is called ischemia. Some other stroke patients who survive are paralyzed on one side of the body. So, pag one side of the body lang ang na-paralyze, it is called the hemiplegia. Pero pag whole body ang na-paralyze, it is called paraplegia. Okay? Next. Degenerative brain disorders. Okay. We have Alzheimer's disease. Victims exhibit memory loss, shortened attention span, disorientation, and eventual language loss. So this one here, the Alzheimer's disease, is the most common type of dementia. Again, dementia is a general term. It is a result of mental deterioration. Okay, sa pagtanda. Next, we have the Parkinson's disease, exhibited by pill rolling movements of the fingers and wrist. It is a degeneration of the dopamine releasing neurons. Okay? So, papaano gagamutin si Parkinson's disease? There should be a deep brain stimulation via implanted electrodes, which will shut down the abnormal brain activity and can also alleviate the tremors or katong pagkurog-kurog sa patient. Huntington's disease. It is a hereditary disorder. Huntingtin protein accumulates in brain cells and tissue dies. That's why merong Huntington's disease. It also impairs the ability to reason, walk, and also speak. Okay? So there is an overproduction of dopamine dito sa Huntington's disease. So it will create wild, jerky, almost continuous flapping movements and almost dancing, which they refer to as chorea. Central nervous system, and we have the spinal cord. So we have already discussed the first structure under the CNS, which is the brain, and the second one is the spinal cord. Spinal cord provides a two-way conduction pathway to and from the brain. There are 31 pairs of spinal nerves, okay? 31 pairs of spinal nerves. Spinal cord is from the foramen magnum to L1 in adult, and for pedia naman, it ends in either L3 or L4. So medyo mas mataas pag bata pa. And your spinal cord is protected by bone, meninges, and also CSF. Still the same with the brain. So I'll see you guys on our next topic, which is part 2, the peripheral nervous system.